And we are live.
Boom, we are live, the Contrarian Daily Podcast. Super excited to have you guys all watching. Welcome. And we've got another awesome guest. We've been pumping out back-to-back epic guests, and we've got another one for you today. So really excited to have him on board. But before we introduce the man of the hour, I need to say a big hello to my epic co-hosts, Jake and Chris. How are we doing, boys?
Excellent, mate.
Mate.
Company could be better, but you know.
Oh, he's just sore because I look better. I look bigger on the camera and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, my mum was watching last week, and she was saying that he looks bigger than me, so I'm a bit filthy.
That's it.
How does he smell, though? Does he smell all right? That's the main thing. He's not putting you off, is he?
Hold on. Look, it's a bit rough.
I can imagine. I'm sure you'll survive, lads. But again, we've got some hot topics to talk about today. Lots happening in the world as per usual, and I think it's going to be great to have our epic guest, Samir Banga, incredible lawyer, on to share some views and shed some light on a few hot topics. So, without further ado, let's welcome Samir Banga to the podcast.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks, guys, for having me. For a bit delayed, I should have been on a bit earlier. That's my bad. I do apologise.
Absolutely fine, brother. So good to have you on board. Always love our chats, man. How you been?
Pretty good, man. Look, it's been an interesting start to the year. Things, I wouldn't say they're picking up. They're basically just continuing on from last year. A lot of what our firm's doing at the moment has become employment law related because people are getting terminated left, right and centre for, let's just say, having a particular view on the mandates, for example. And I know you guys are speaking a bit about it, where me and Andy, we've spoken about this several times. It's not going to go away anytime soon, but hopefully, let's just say, pastors change and things get a bit better generally, at least legally speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been a crazy ride over the last 2 years. I mean, one thing I noticed about you, Samir, is that, you know, there's a lot of when this all started happening, that everything took place, it was very hard to find anyone with a bit of credibility or anybody that was a professional like yourself stepping up and talking out against the narrative. And you were one of the first. You were one of the only lawyers I knew that was brave enough to speak up and fight against it and speak your truth. What got you, I guess, motivated to do that? Because I'm sure, I mean, like me, we all had a lot to lose speaking up and I guess going against the narrative. What motivated you, and what was it like for you when you started to speak up?
Look, my motivation is because I've seen this. Historically, I've seen stuff like this happening previously. It's nothing new. I look at how ethnics have faced the police, the way authority has treated people who are migrants in this country, and just generally police overreach in everyday society. So by background, I've been involved in criminal law for a long period of time now. I shouldn't say long, but it's been a few years. And this is nothing new to me. I think that's where it came in, and just this overt trust of the government and what the government telling you being right is completely wrong. And I think that's what originally brought me to this side of it, because it's nothing new. It's just what we're now seeing is this being implemented on a wide range or on a bigger scale. So people who never would have been impacted by, say, police mistreatment are all of a sudden seeing what police can do. And please don't get me wrong, I'm not saying every police officer is bad here, but when you deal with this stuff day in, day out, you kind of gain a different understanding for how the police can be seen amongst different minority groups and different people on the street, so to speak. So people in the lower socio-demographic scales would have been other First Nations Australians, would have been a lot of immigrants, would have been treated very differently. So that's the reason that I got into it. And when I first started speaking about this, it kind of moved along. I shouldn't say distrust of the government, but a healthy skepticism of what the government does. This whole thing that rules are rules is absolute bullshit. It's not true. Rules are bent for different people all the time. That's just a fact of the matter. You've seen what Scott Morrison's done when it came to giving himself an exemption. You see the ministers give themselves exemptions. People on private jets have been coming to this country all through COVID, but no one speaks about it. They haven't been demonized. All of a sudden, someone unvaccinated comes and fuck, it's all uproar. It doesn't make any sense. And this is the kind of stuff that people need to see. The media never, and I mean mainstream media, never portrays both sides of the story fairly. This has been a topic like that. Police mistreatment was no different. So the only thing is, I guess I look at this from a different gauge and I say it's not even about that. We need to look at both sides. That's how I started anyway, and make our decisions from that, analyze it first, and do not just blindly trust what's happening because you're being told to do so, because that's the most ignorant and naive position anyone could ever take, in my opinion.
Absolutely. I mean, I 100% agree with you. And I think that's, there are a few things that have shocked me over the past 2 years. One of them is just really recognizing and I hate to use the word, but unfortunate corruption that there is in our system and in our government, which has been really a bit of an eye-opener for me as well. But also, of course, just to see people's attitudes and how trusting they truly were, and how easily and quickly people went along with the narrative, even when it just mind-blowingly makes no sense, and so much of it. But yet, you're absolutely evil if you're not abiding by every single rule. So, man, before we move forward, credit to you, dude, because you really stuck your neck out. You've been representing hundreds and it might be thousands, I don't know, but lots and lots of people that have been in tricky situations due to these ridiculous rules and mandates, etc. So you've been doing a great work for the community, man. We really appreciate it.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to ask as
Thanks,
well.
man.
Sam,
appreciate
what kind of
that. But look,
backlash
I
have
think
you
there's a lot
faced?
more to be
Because
done.
Andy did mention that,
And we all play our different parts in what we do. And I keep saying the law is really, really slow, like very slow. It's going to be people who create change, not us. We are the afterthought, the afterburner.
Yeah. Sorry, mate. I think we've got a bit of a delay in that sort of thing.
Yeah,
so
we lost you there for a second. I was going to ask as well, Samir. Obviously, Andy said that people are going out on a limb and like.
So you're asking what type of backlash I've personally had?
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, guys, we've got a bit of a delay here, which is the joys of being live. Samir, I'm assuming you're probably listening through to Jake's question right now. If you can, maybe try to answer that, and maybe just check your connection as well if you can when you get this. Okay. Well, while this is happening, I just want to echo just what Samir was saying as well beforehand. I was one of those people who was very, I wouldn't say pro-police, but very trusting of the police, and wouldn't believe that they'd do anything wrong or anything like this. And this has certainly opened my eyes up drastically and dramatically. And similar to what you were saying, Andy, too. I remember way back when this began, we were discussing. You actually showed me. You introduced me to Samir's stuff that, he's been speaking out from the very, very beginning, and it's easier to speak out now because obviously there's a lot more momentum behind the movement. But again, just to acknowledge back at the beginning, it was very, very tough, and I'm sure from a business perspective, there was a lot more being risked, or at risk, I should say, in doing that back in the time too. So, it's a crazy time, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. I've got a few questions myself I want to ask as we go through, because again, I probably haven't had as much exposure to negative police interactions, and I need to know what to do when that happens as well. So we'll get to that throughout this.
So just to because now I don't know what happened. I don't have my internet connection. I think it's slowed down. But you're asking the personal ramifications and just business ramifications of what's happened. Look, it's not going to change. It's still happening. Some people hate me. Some people love me. I think there's no middle ground with that, or the middle ground seems to be silent on it. So you either love or hate. I think it's different for Andy or you guys. Eventually, the more that you say something about an issue, the more that you have on the line. And I think as my following has gone up, or people have started listening more, the more criticism I've received as well. So there was a time where I was just a solicitor. Now you automatically, by some people, get clumped as an anti-vax solicitor, which makes no sense because that's not my position. My position is purely give people a choice about whether they want to be vaccinated, and don't tell them they're going to have to be fired and sit at home and not earn a living for their family if they don't. That's all I've really said. And I've spoken about the police, abuse of power, where they've taken it too far, in my opinion. That's exactly the same shit I was saying 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. But now, because it's by certain people clumped in this whole anti-vaccine, that shit, it just becomes a target. Look, I get abuse sometimes. I don't get it all the time, not as much as some other people. I was speaking to Chris from Primod earlier today. He gets death threats. I haven't had any death threats. The most interesting one I think I've had is I was told that Aboriginal, First Nations Australians are not being vaccinated and dying because for some reason I am the cause of that solely. So that's one that I've had. I've had people saying that I'm stopping minority groups getting vaccinated, which I literally have not said don't get vaccinated. I'm still not saying that. I really just don't care. But you shouldn't be enforcing these mandates, which are just ridiculous. That's my problem. And in the end, it should be about education, not about punishing people. And that I will never change on, because it doesn't matter what the view is, right? There's always different views on different topics. I understand that a lot of us do, but for some weird reason, when it comes to this, you're not allowed to have anything alternative. You either support it and you've got free reign. You can post about just getting your vaccine, like, I don't even know if it's real, but you can post about just getting your shot and then you get pushed up on Instagram. But as soon as you post anything that says, oh, this guy just got injured from a vaccine, straight down it goes. Yesterday, interestingly, we posted about First Nations and genocide on our business post, and that got heavily censored. It went down to about 15% of the traction we usually get. So I started paying attention to that stuff as well. I continue to get backlash, and the dilemma, look, I wear my company logo everywhere I go, even when I go to the gym. So I'm not running away from it. I know where I stand on it. It's like any human rights issue that I see. I think they're all the same. There's no bigger and less. It's relative to the person. So I just look at it that way.
Yeah.
And ultimately, the more people know me, the more I'm going to get criticized. It's just part and parcel of what we do. And it's the same thing with any of us. Like, I'm sure, Andy, you've copped more now, Reese. Like, the more you speak about this, the more you're going to cop. You speak to certain people, you're going to cop more. I've been called a fascist. I know Rukshan was called a fascist. I was called, it's interesting when you get called a racist for having a view that says you don't want to force vaccines, which makes no fucking sense whatsoever. But that's the kind of shit that people jump to. It's like you're calling me, we're all racist in some little way. Like, it might be more or less. Every country seems to have this pride about coming from that country, right? So arguably that's racism as well. But what people bring out of the bag when they want to criticize you is incredible. But look, some of it's very funny, like being called an anti-vax lawyer. I'll take that, whatever. At least I'm fighting for something, that not just sitting back and just letting shit happen. So that same sentiment work against them when people know that, fuck, if I want someone who's going to fight for me, I'm not going to go to the average guy. I'll go to someone who's an anti-vax lawyer. So it could work in the positive as well.
Yeah. Sounds like there aren't many pejoratives you haven't been called at this stage. I think we've got anti-vax lawyer, we've got fascist, racist. You've done it all. And I was going to ask, it was really interesting the way that you said that there's been human rights issues that have been happening for years now, and people really have only started tuning in recently. What were you voicing your opinions at before COVID?
Look, I have had a strong feeling that First Nations people should be represented in the Australian Constitution, the Australian landscape. That's been something I've felt for a long time. It's interesting that now people are picking up on that, whereas I've spoken about that many times. I haven't been given the forum either. To be honest, a lot of what my traction is because of what I'm doing now. So I guess that's part and parcel of the reason. It's no one's fault. It's just I didn't have that forum, or I didn't have that framework to speak to people about it. But when it comes to refugees, like, people still consider that refugees aren't illegal. There's no such thing. A refugee cannot be an illegal immigrant. It doesn't actually make sense. It doesn't go together. They're mutually exclusive. As soon as it's a person's a refugee, they're not illegal. That's it. They're legal. So there's shit like that I've seen in this country for a while. It inherently tells you about racist policies in this country. And I'm also one person that says some people take racism too far because we get a bit too sensitive with what we think as well. But that is outwardly racist when you say someone is, they're not a refugee and they haven't actually suffered enough to be able to come here and claim they're real refugees. Look, when we look at First Nations people and the fact that they've been treated differently, there's no doubt that females are treated differently in this country for how long. We're only just catching up. The law, for example, now has more female lawyers than male lawyers. But for a long time, it was heavily dominated by males. That's a genuine issue. I think it really is. But I think the problem comes down to when people start trying to label which one's more important, which one's less important, because anything that's human rights based, you can't give it a rating, in my opinion. It's very hard to do that. Yes, okay, you can say there are people starving in Africa, there are people starving in India, other Asian countries. There are people starving in Australia, quite literally, but we seem to forget about that because we seem to think that this country is all perfectly good. There are people that don't have an ID, so they can't go to Centrelink and actually get any money from the government. They kind of don't exist. They're still living on the streets, but we completely forget about that too. And part of the issues that I see from this is when people have lost their businesses, what have they done? They don't just have a background. They don't have a second job they can go to. They've literally lost their livelihood. That is a genuine human rights issue to me. That's not a first world problem. It's just a genuine problem. But look, most of my stuff has been like how the authority has dealt with people here, especially with police. That's been my biggest issue, and just how immigration has functioned in this country. How I think that for some reason people are very insular. They look at issues in other countries when it suits them. Otherwise, they'll completely ignore it. So when stuff's fine in Australia, forget about everything that's happening everywhere else. But all of a sudden now, when we're having issues here, it could be worse because there's people in Africa couldn't afford to feed themselves and they're starving. It doesn't make sense to me, but that's how I feel this country works sometimes.
And it's interesting because there have been so many examples of police brutality during this, but we don't actually think about what happened beforehand, after, and it just opens up a whole new can of worms to hear about that. And mate, you should think about writing a book about it because it's very interesting, and a lot of people in Australia would not know about that stuff at all.
If I could write, I'm not really a writer. I don't think I'd have the attention span to do it. So that's my only issue with that. I find it easier talking. But look, when it comes to police mistreatment, I'm not the only solicitor. This doesn't matter whether you're pro-vax or anti-vax for that matter. If you've been in criminal defense, you'll see it. There are many lawsuits against police. I've had my personal experiences. Like I've literally been pulled over, and I won't say exactly how I was treated, but let's just say it started off with 2 police, ended up with 8. And this is only a few years ago as well. Cops refused to tell me why they pulled me over, even though by LEPRA in New South Wales, police are meant to tell you why they pulled you over. And this is to someone that knows what they're doing. Now, if I was one of my clients, for example, who had a bit more of a hot head or had less to lose, say, for example, I didn't care about a practicing certificate, I'm sure I could have done a hell of a lot more and become a lot more frustrated. I have seen people who have been antagonized by police who are finally bitten back, then charged. It happens. It's called proactive policing. And if people need to realize this shit is happening in Australia, in New South Wales, in Victoria, in Queensland, in WA, in NT, ACT, all over. It's just very well hidden. And unfortunately, a lot of people who are in this position aren't believed, which is sad because they don't have the money and the resources to be believed. But when what happened with Novak Djokovic, we all know about it. And don't get me wrong, I have nothing against him, but I'm glad people saw that. However, if that was the average person, or if it was just a standard refugee, that's the wrong term to use, but just use that go with it for now, someone who didn't have the same following, you wouldn't know about it. A lot of this is brushed under the carpet. I can tell you we've dealt with humanitarian visas previously, where the government has said, sorry, we've met our quota, we're not going to look at it, it's done. But we can't raise a song and a dance because no one's going to listen.
Samir, sorry, just on that point as well, what would you recommend people do when they're being subjected to that proactive policing? So someone who doesn't have the knowledge and experience you've got, who might be a little bit hot-headed, how should they handle themselves? What should they do or say to help them not only in the situation, but also moving forward beyond that point?
So really, they've got to look at it with a mid to longer term perspective, because if you act against the police, you will be charged for assault officer, resist officer, or some kind of like charge in different states and territories. So unfortunately, as bad as it is, you kind of have to play the game for that time. Don't say anything unnecessary that will be used against you. It always is. They generally these days wear body-worn cameras and they will film, or at least film when it suits them if the cop is not the great type, let's say. There's a little bit of lack of control. I've seen videos go missing before.
Oh, no, he's dropped out right when it was getting very, very important too.
Damn, that was interesting.
We'll try to get him back. We'll work in the background to get him back. But boys, what were you?
Yeah, I was really interested. I mean, it's something that I don't really think about as much as I should. I think about the other issues that are happening in Australia, because I think that the fact that like often these social justice causes are a little bit synonymous with, you know, your far left ideologies, you kind of dismiss them, but there's so much subject matter there.
There we go. Got him back. Brilliant.
Yeah, sorry guys, technology issues at my end. This is the problem about living in the sticks in New South Wales. We don't have proper internet out here, so I'm using my 4G. But look, part of it just comes down to the situation, right? Unfortunately, what we need to realize is the police are going to get more credibility in court as well. This is why a lot of people have started implementing filming and filming what's going on, because at least that is tangible evidence. You can show the courtroom that this has happened, this is what was said. It's very hard to remain calm. I can tell from experience with my clients that it's very difficult, because sometimes you might get a knee into the back, or sometimes you might be treated really poorly where they'll tighten the cuffs too much. And what does that person do? It's very, very difficult to do anything about it. But if you act out, you can defend yourself against the police to a certain extent. So for example, if the cuffs are too tight, you can say, hey, they're too tight. If you accidentally...
I know. This is fascinating stuff. Again, like, you know,
we're getting censored. We're not paranoid at all.
Right.
We're getting censored.
It's the Illuminati. That's it. That's it.
But look, man, it's crazy, and I think you're right. Not enough people see the other side. I think a lot of people are now. I don't know if you guys saw the clip of the that cop coming in behind the protester in the subway and full face slamming this poor. I don't know what happened to that.
Could have done honestly irreparable damage to his brain.
Oh wow! Just the force of that flip, and it was just so blatantly not
not needed at all.
Yeah, not needed or antagonized by the person, the victim. So I was blown away that that's taking place here and now, and we hardly know about it. The man's back.
Yeah, he's back.
Yeah, I've changed to my computer, so hopefully this works a little bit better. I was on the phone before, but
Great.
I do apologize to people watching, and sorry guys, but look, that's probably the best thing that people can do, and try and remember. I always say document what happened as soon as you can. Think about the statement in your head. So the series of events, because that's generally how these matters are knocked out. When you finally get
on that, just quickly as well, what about if you're by yourself and you're recording on your phone? Like, I've seen footage of where the police will take the phone away from the person and things like that. What are your rights around that? Like, do you have any rights around that, or do you have to just let them take your phone and stop the recording?
Well, technically, they're allowed to do whatever it takes to stop commission of a crime, right? And in that position, if it's just you, it's very easy for them to take your phone, right or wrong, because even if they're wrong, what does it matter? The phone's taken, there's no video. So that's not going to change what happens to you after the fact regardless. And the other thing is, let's just say the cops come up to you, there's four, you're by yourself, you pull out your phone and start filming, you know that's going to piss them off. That's not going to make them deal with you better. That's probably going to annoy them. So the dilemma there comes down to, look, it is different in different circumstances. They will most likely warn you, but then they will eventually take it. Because if they're just going to say, well, it's commission of offense, we have to stop it, this person's filming, we obviously have to arrest the person, which means put their hands in handcuffs. How can we do it if you don't take the phone? So they'll probably stop recording pretty quickly. That's just basically going to go. Unfortunately, when you're by yourself, that is a situation that you can't really circumvent. It is what it is at that point. You can kind of hope there's CCTV around, but look, coppers aren't stupid either. And if they really want to do something, I'm pretty sure, not all of them, some of them have been pretty dumb. We've seen with some footy players, for example. I forgot that guy who was drunk on the beach. I forgot his name now. But when the real story in the video got out, it was very different to what the police officer said. So they're not all super intelligent. But if they really want to brush you up, and say, for example, the proactive crime squad, they know what they're doing. They know how to deal with it, and they'll be smart about it. Sometimes it's just a matter of dumb luck, unfortunately. Just they slip up, that can catch them. But really, it's about keeping your credibility intact. So if you're credible, they're credible, the magistrate still has to turn their view to which one's more credible. If they can't decide, they can't really find you guilty because there's got to be a reasonable doubt there. Now, what you do after that's different. You can how you treat the police, if you decide to sue them, if you have a case, if you were detained unlawfully. But that's stuff for later. In the moment, I do recommend, and this is only a recommendation because people know how they feel at that time. They know how intimidated they are, how pissed off they get if they're treated that way. And it's very difficult. But if you do act, if you do push the officer, you're going to get charged with assault. If you stop them putting the cuffs on, you're going to get charged with resist. You can swear at them. There's nothing illegal about that. So they shouldn't really be charging you there. But when it comes to any physical action, I'd say something. If it's hurting you, the cuffs are hurting, just yell out to the officer, hey, officer, the cuffs are hurting. I need you to loosen these cuffs, because that's going to be recorded as well. And they can't then turn around and say you didn't say it. If they are actually hurting you, make sure, look, this does happen. It doesn't always work, but it's better than just sitting there in pain. And it's better than kicking the officer off you, because that's just going to get you in a hell of a lot more strife. Sometimes it's just, if you have people there, that helps. If you don't, it is bad luck. And we've seen a number of those cases. I actually had one from the first protest where there was a female who started filming straight away. She wasn't wearing a mask. That's what the officers came up to her. They then said she was part of the protest. She said she wasn't. She was in the area but wasn't. 4 police officers. She was arrested. Her phone was taken. She was actually quite injured, because she was quite a petite girl. So she was quite injured from that incident. I don't know what happened with the case. It didn't continue on, but this kind of stuff happens all the time. So there was a certain element that was recorded. After that, it wasn't, because the cops obviously picked the phone up and turned it off. But that's just luck of the draw. And the thing is, man, as much as I want to say to people, I wish you could always be safe, you just can't, because I could be in that same position. And put it this way, I'm not going to have more credibility in someone else who's in another profession or doesn't have a criminal history. I've got the same. If it's 4 coppers against me, the only difference is that I've been speaking about this for a while, so someone could ascertain that, maybe the cops are coming against him. But otherwise, I'm going to be in the same position. And that's just the nature of how this works. So this is why I genuinely believe the police should be well educated. No defunding shit. They need to be better educated than they are, rather than worse. They should have training like the military does. And I was speaking to a couple of gentlemen behind the scenes, a couple of ladies behind the scenes, when it comes to military training. They know how to de-escalate a situation. Cops get shit all training. The training's terrible. And we're putting them on the street. That doesn't make any sense. The military, look, and don't get me wrong, the military are in positions that are probably tougher, at least arguably. But why wouldn't we train our police force to be able to de-escalate properly? To know that when someone is now down and they are no longer a threat, move on. You don't just start hitting them or kicking them, as some of the videos that I've seen. That's the kind of training they don't do anymore. And that's mismanagement by our governments, I believe.
Yeah, and I was watching Battleground Melbourne by Topher Field this week, and it's such an awesome documentary. And I think that one of the real turning points in the documentary was when the police brutality started to come out and the overreach started to become really abundantly obvious. And I was wondering if you've seen any particular clips or videos of a more egregious example of police brutality where you think that if somebody had perhaps known their rights, they could have fared better, or something that was particularly bad, like a situation or a video that you've seen.
In police brutality, or just generally in police interaction we're talking about in terms of fared better?
Like in particular, I've seen some videos of Avi Yemeni, for example, where he's sort of roasted police officers when they've been trying to kick somebody out of a park and they had no right to do it. Have there been many videos where you've seen police overstepping the mark, and if people had have known their rights, they could have potentially had the answers and answered back and fared much better than they did?
Completely. I can give you an example of the mask, where at one point before New South Wales, like different states and territories have different rules on whether you need to carry proof. In New South Wales, before stat dec or a GP exemption became a thing, you didn't need to show anything. You just need to say you had an exemption. Now, some police had no idea about this, and they would still fine people or tell people to get out of the premise because they didn't want to wear a mask. Not arrest at that point. I'm sure there might have been issues of that too. But say, for example, the person then knew that by the mandate, it said you didn't have to produce evidence. All you had to say was you had an exemption, and the officer couldn't actually do anything. That's partly the reason they introduced stat decs and having to show the police that you had a valid exemption. Other circumstances could include being in the vicinity or being at someone's house, reasonable excuses. That's one that I've seen previously, a couple of issues with that, because at one point, no one really knew what a reasonable excuse was. We're kind of making it up as it went. And compassionate reasons could mean many different things. And this is a dilemma with law too. When you kind of run with things that quickly, it hasn't been interpreted at this point. So what's compassionate for one person may not be for someone else. So opinions on that, on views on that, could be very different as well. But in terms of police interaction, knowing would that have changed, I dare say, look, I've seen some videos where people have done the right thing, like completely done the right thing and still being treated very, very poorly, especially in Melbourne with the protests. So I don't know, could that just be something else? Like, could it really have been different? Maybe if the person walked away, but I can't really blame that person when they've gone up. Like one particular one I saw, they actually told the officer, hold on, I'm unarmed. There's kids here. Can you not shoot? Can you not actually, use any violence or just back off a little bit? I don't think that person did anything wrong. Look, maybe he shouldn't have gone up, might be the argument, but really he went up, hands up. He completely said he was unarmed. There's a shit ton of police around with weapons. There was no need to treat that guy like they did. And he got beanbagged. So it wasn't circumstances like that. I think it's just lack of training and poor policing. And some of the information I got, that some of the officers that were at these protests were not very well trained. They were newbies. Some police were basically protesting by not going to these protests, if that makes sense. So not actually being there was their form of saying, we're not going to police this stuff because we think it's wrong. So then who did you end up with there? And put it this way, if you're an officer that just wants drama, where are you going to be? The protest. Great way. Because you're going to get believed straight up. The people that are there aren't, especially when it was considered unlawful. Once it's actually now mandated, or once that mandate goes away and it's no longer an unlawful gathering, it's very different. But before that, the police could use that as a very good excuse to get away with certain things because the person shouldn't have been there. And look at what mainstream media was saying. These people shouldn't have been protesting in the first place. So they got away with a lot.
Yeah, I was watching a podcast with Jocko Willink, if you know him from the United States. And one of the things that he was saying was that during military, they were constantly doing practical drills where they were staying alert. Whereas police, we don't know how many practical drills they're doing once they've got their badge. And it's almost like if you don't have any practical training and then 6 months, a year goes by, you haven't seen any action and then it happens, you're not going to know how to handle yourself. You might see red. So perhaps that should be something that is in the criteria every month or every few months. There you go back to the basics.
I completely agree. These people have a lot of power. Authorities have power. Police have a lot of power, especially detectives and people in certain positions. You need specialist training for this. And don't get me wrong, I know that detectives undergo specialist training, but when you're on the beat, when you're dealing with people like this, you need to have this training. In fact, you should. I don't think they give it. They basically get 6 months in New South Wales at the start in Goulburn at the police training centre. But apart from that, the degree in policing isn't very much, and that's all theoretical. But how about this type of training? And this is a difference with the army and the police. Look, I know, again, they're different, but why wouldn't you look at improving your police force by implementing skills that have been proven elsewhere, such as in the army or the infantry or the air force or whatever it may be? And this is why it's important that education is a huge factor. And I'm not talking about degrees, but I'm talking about proper practical training, because degrees don't make good police officers either necessarily. Neither do you. Just like some people with degrees are going to be good officers, some people without degrees will be good officers. It's a demeanor that matters. And if someone has a controlling feature about them and has a wrong demeanor for the job, I think they're going to make a terrible police officer because you have a shit ton of control.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I really wanted to cover as well was that in terms of our freedom of speech in Australia, a lot of people think that it's basically a given right, something that we're born with, but it's actually not protected in our constitution. And I was wondering if you could maybe explain to us how that actually works and if there is hope for us to have constitutionally protected freedom of speech at some stage.
So firstly, starting at the end with your last question, yes, there is. What do we need to do? Because people ask me this all the time. We need to elect people that are going to actually change the constitution, make and propose changes. We should have a human rights charter in every state and territory in this country, or a Commonwealth one. That's what we need. So that kind of stuff should be protected. Our constitution is one of the worst in the world. And people are going to hate me for saying this, but we didn't come out of civil unrest like America. That's why they have certain protections that we don't have. Our political free speech is an inferred right from case law. It's not unfettered and it's not untested. For example, someone in New South Wales made a comment about Gladys, about something about her she should be scared of being pushed off a cliff or something like that. It was never a direct threat to her. It was a stupid thing to say, but never a direct threat. And that person I know was charged for it. To me, that's political free speech. It's a very dumb thing to say, but it is political free speech. How many times have we uttered that, man, that dude should be dead, or that's what a shit prime minister, or what a shit president, or whatever. We don't have a president here, but if we were talking about Trump for some people, or whatever you want to say, there are a lot of nasty things said. That should not automatically be an offense, because that's just not how it works. Political free speech should be ingrained and enshrined, but it isn't. We only have, and people don't understand this, it's an inferred free speech. It's inferred from the Constitution by a decision that was made, and a couple of decisions that have been made over the years. To ingrain that, you either have more decisions that increase the scope of the political free speech and free speech generally, or you introduce something like a Bill of Rights or a Charter of Rights that allows for it. Now, there's always a hope that the Constitution could change, and I think the Australian Constitution does need changing. I think there's protections that this period and the next few years are going to teach us how important these protections are for people. And that is something that we can do as people by electing officials who are going to create that change. Now, I don't know if any party is going to do that at the moment. I don't have any political allegiance. However, if someone does, that would be great, because I'd love to hear about it. So it is something, but this is not an individual thing. This is about getting the right people in power in the first place to create that change. Just like if we were to become a republic, we would need a referendum on that and constitutional change. Now, introducing a Charter of Rights or a Bill of Rights is no different if we're going to do it into the Constitution. We can also have legislation that sits second to the Constitution on that. It doesn't have to change it, so it doesn't have to be a referendum per se, but that would still be one way of looking at it. There's a few ways. However, that still means introducing bills that become acts and that become enforced all over the country.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, look, I guess in short, what people really need to understand is you don't have the freedoms you think you do. At least they're not enshrined. They just happen to be there, and we've been lucky. And the last 2 years, our luck ran out pretty damn fast. And this should be a lesson to a lot of people that we need change in this country. And if people think it's not broke, it is broke. And as you guys pointed out before, the corruption, if there was no corruption, we wouldn't have ICAC, we wouldn't have IBAC. There's a reason for these institutions.
And it's so scary to think about how quickly that could just be taken away from us like that. I mean, we don't really have it, but people think we have it. And the notion of free speech is alive and well in our country, but it's actually not constitutionally, something that exists. So it's fascinating to hear it from that. And a lot of people need to hear that sort of thing. So thank you for spreading that awareness. And another thing that I wanted to talk about was the pandemic bill in Victoria, because for me, that is one of the most egregious oversteps of authority and power that I've ever seen in a Western country. And I was really shocked when that ended up going through. And I did think that we were going to win it, and that the freedom lovers were going to win this one, but we lost, unfortunately. Is there hope for us to overturn that? If the right people were elected and if the right people were in power, could they rip that bill up and say never again?
Which bill are we talking about? You cut out at the start.
The pandemic bill in Victoria.
Yes, there is. You'd have to go backwards. You could get the right officials in and take it backwards. Because interestingly, having a 2-year limitation isn't a bad thing. That's a good thing. There's actually a better bill before than what it is now. It still gave the government a shit ton of power. But yeah, it can be. Look, the dilemma with bill legislation is the only way legislation is invalid is if it's unconstitutional. Otherwise, it's fine, right? The mandates are slightly different because any mandate could technically be tested under the Act to say it's proportionate and reasonable. But in terms of withdrawing legislation, it happens all the time. There have been new crimes introduced by the Crimes Act. There have been some that have been repealed. There was once a time where adultery was a crime. Bigamy was a crime. So that's being married more than once or married to more than one person at one time in this country. It's no longer a crime per se. You can't really be punished for it, but it was. So things can change. It's just about getting the right people in power who are going to change that. And this is where people speaking out and people actually making that, making a noise about it, is going to cause it. Because right now they have it easy. Right now, if they're going to continue doing what they do. And quite frankly, I think they think the bills are great, which it wasn't, and it never was. The change in the act wasn't good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things as well that I really wanted to cover with you is that in the USA, we've seen Joe Biden's vax mandate blocked. And I know they've got the Supreme Court system over there. And my understanding of Australia's judiciary system is so rudimentary that I wouldn't even really know if ScoMo can come in tomorrow and say, hey, I'm going to block that, or if we have a high court where this can eventually go to where they can block it. Because I know in the US, they've got the Supreme Court and the justices on the Supreme Court. How does it work for us? And is there a possibility that gets blocked entirely for us, or do the state premiers have all the power?
See, this is a dilemma here. You have different premiers introducing different mandates across the country. So the Victorians have their own, New South Wales has its own, WA has its own. So you're challenging each state's challenging that. Whereas if Biden does something at a national level, it's very different. So if Scotty Morrison was to do something and he introduced a mandate that impacted every Australian, that would be much easier to challenge. And it would go to the federal jurisdiction rather than just Supreme Court of whatever state it is at the time. So that's a subtle difference in what's going on, because if it's at a national level, it's automatically different. And one of the things that's made it harder here is because they've been at state levels. Each state, you need to launch a different challenge. And then you need to get it up. Sure, if you launch a challenge in New South Wales or Victoria and it gets to the higher court, that could have implications on the rest of the country, but it's still a process to get there. And the high court, you need to get there by process. So say you start off in the Supreme Court of Victoria or New South Wales, you lose, you appeal it to the Court of Appeal, then you take it up to the High Court with leave, or if you argue a constitutional argument, then that can go straight to the High Court. But that's one of the dilemmas, is access to justice and how slow it is. And with something like this, I think it's being illuminated. The issues and the slowness in the justice system have been illuminated. The only matter that's really quickly gone anywhere is Novak Djokovic's. That was bloody fast. Apart from that, everything else has been slow. We have a challenge against the mandate in Victoria, which is going to hearing in March of this year, I believe. And that started in December last year. So by that point, for a lot of people, it might be a moot point anyway. It might be redundant. So these are the kinds of issues we face when a policy that's, I guess, this far-ranging, it should be a lot quicker. So to answer your question, it's a bit different because it's state by state. It's not that it can't be challenged in the High Court. It's just going to get there. That could have far-reaching implications for other states and territories if it's the exact same issues being run. But it's still going to get there first. And if it was the Commonwealth government that introduced something under the Biosecurity Act, it's very different. That would be easier to challenge because you'd have people from all over the country getting together to challenge it rather than having to challenge state mandates. Because that's why you have Scott Morrison saying, I don't have a mandate. I don't have a vaccine mandate, because he doesn't. It's the states that do. And effectively, that's made it harder. What we should be pushing for is the national cabinet that was created by Scott Morrison being completely split up, and the information there, which it was ruled at one point that should have been made publicly available, that was then basically shafted by Scott Morrison, and he went against the orders, and effectively he's appealing it, and he's tried to keep that secret. That's the kind of stuff that should be getting out to the public, and that's the kind of stuff we should be pushing. But look, it can be done. It's just very slow. We have a very slow judicial system.
Yeah, well, I mean, I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for all of this information and for all the things that you've been doing as well, because this is absolutely impossible to understand for somebody like me unless you have somebody who has the knowledge and the communication skills to be able to break it down slowly and systematically and help us to understand it. And I guess I've watched too much Suits and Law and Order, and I just think that it all sort of happens quite smoothly. And
all over within a 1 hour episode.
One more question was that I know you said you don't have any political affiliations or leanings, but is there anybody that you're looking at the moment?
Yeah, they seem to always have magic in their shows, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
I was going to say, is there anybody that you're looking at the moment that's, you think that could be our guy? I really like his policies or her policies and where they're going or their rhetoric, and perhaps they could be a way forward.
Look, If I'm completely honest, not yet. I see the UAPs coming out. I do like what the LNP is doing, the LND, National Liberal Democrats, are doing as well. I'm looking to, in Victoria, I think the Liberal Party might create some change too. Like the problem is different states have different, like it's different. In New South Wales, I think Labor and Liberal are one and the same. At a federal level, I definitely think Labor and Liberal are one and the same. I just can't see any differences between them. I think they're both full of shit. So what I have been saying for some time now is I really believe we need coalition governments, not one party ruling. So we need to be voting with the smaller parties. I can't tell you who to vote for. I just don't know. I don't know any of them well enough. I am not a massive Clive Palmer fan by any means, but if he's going to do something, great. Look, if we get the Shooters Party and they decide to do something, great. I don't care who it is. They just need to do something. That's all it is. Doesn't matter about the religious affiliations or what the affiliations in those are. We just need to make sure the change they're going to create are good for the country. So I think at the current moment, it's better that we have more than one party in power. We have a coalition that has to get through. So any decision that's made has to get through multiple people and not just one party. I think that's the best thing we can do in the short term. In the long term, we then see what these little parties are going to offer. And hopefully then we can move towards a better system and voting the right people in. Because right now, I think it's just too raw. The UAP, I'm sure, has some great candidates. I know a couple of them, but that doesn't mean I could ever endorse the whole party, because I also think there's people that shouldn't be there who I'd never vote for in a million years. So that's my issue with all parties, right? So the lesser of the evils to me is find out who your local member is for these small parties, see if you can chat with them, see what they're representing, and forget about the party. Look at the person you're voting for, and that might be the best way to create change, because at least you're going to get multiple different people with multiple different views, and you need to suck it to them. WA, for example, Mark McGowan has way too much power. Like, he's an absolute tyrant, man. Like, it's crazy. So this is the kind of stuff we do not want over the country.
Yeah, we certainly don't want people who are just a drunk on power like Mark McGowan. And yeah, mate, we're going to let you go, but thank you so much for coming on. And before I let you go, I just wanted to ask you, I'm so interested in what you said before about, in particular, about minority communities and the police brutality and refugees and all of the legalities around that. So I'm going to ask you on like an Instagram live date, if we can do an Instagram live one time and just talk and just build that out a little bit, because I think that's really cool and really important.
Yeah, 100%, man. Love to. Let's do it.
Awesome. Thank you so much, mate, for coming on.
Quickly, one more thing. Where can people find you, mate? If you're...
Okay, so my personal one is at Samir Banga, SAMIR.BANGA. Then the law firm is at Banga Legal, which is BANGA Legal. So either or. The personal one's where I post more of the controversial stuff, because I can't do that as a law firm. But I mean, it's pretty obvious where my views are either way.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks, Samir.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Take care, mate.
That was absolutely incredible. I think a lot of really, really useful information there. And if you're not following Samir, make sure you go follow him on Instagram there. What was your big takeaway, man? Do you have
I just think that the legal perspective is really interesting, because I've never studied law or never done anything that would remotely qualify me to talk about these subjects. So the fact that we can have somebody who is able to articulate and sort of build out ideas that we kind of know in our head, but we don't really know anything about. Like, for example, Scott Morrison, the power he has, and the state leaders. And we kind of, because we see it all as all a big, just chaotic synthesis of different laws and legalities, and this person's going to hold their vote, and it's just chaotic. So I don't really know what's going on. So it's good to have somebody who can just break it down and give us a bit more of an insight on it.
Look, I've never heard you speak a more accurate truth that you have no idea what's going on. But no, mate, very, very valid points. I'm the same as you. Like, it's all brand new. And prior to this, I think, we're all just going about our daily lives, and we had no idea what, any of this sort of stuff was going on, as Samir was talking about with, minority groups and all the other stuff. And, if that's one positive, if that's the way to look at it that's come out of this, is that highlighting all this, police overreach, government overreach, and things like that. And it just made me think as well, maybe that's why ScoMo was so keen to push all the power and things onto the states, to make it more difficult to challenge legally.
Maybe he could just go to Hawaii and just hang out if that was the case.
Probably.
Yeah. No, exactly. But I think that, like, me personally, I'm really playing catch up in terms of Australian politics and the legal system of Australia. And I think that unfortunately, it's been very boring traditionally.
Mhm.
No one really cares. And they say 1 minute Julia Gillard's the prime minister, and then the next minute it's Tony Abbott, and they're all stabbing each other in the back. And it's like, well, not too much changes in my personal life, depending on who gets in. But now we have skin in the game. And
Correct.
now we really need to be paying attention. So that's why I'm trying to learn a little bit more and know a little bit more about what I'm going about and doing fantastically well, as you can see.
No, that's fantastic. And I think there's really important conversations we're having. And for those of you who are watching, like, you know, I hope you guys are following along with this, because chances are you're like us, you know, I'm exactly the same as you. Didn't really have too much of an interest in politics or anything, or the legal system. And just trying to desperately play catch up. So, Do you have any other sort of thoughts before we wrap the episode?
Mate, I think that was fantastic. And once again, thank you to Samir. He was awesome.
Thanks. All right, we'll see you guys next time.
All right, take care, guys.